Camera menus and settings are a world of their own, and each brand has their own thing. Nikon is no exception. A lot of people talk about the Nikon menu system as being kind of complicated, so today we're going to go over 5 different camera settings that I think are good to know about, that maybe are a little off the beaten path compared to what you might be used to. My partner said that I need a new intro, so she told me to workshop some, so here were her ideas. Ready? Welcome to YouTube with Chris. Welcome to Cruising with Chris. That's what she calls it when she watches my location when I'm not around. Welcome to Captures with Chris. I guess because photography, like captures. This is Cats with Chris. Well, let me know which one you like in the comments, I guess. Moving on. So again, 5 settings that I think are beneficial to know about when you are looking at the Nikon system. These are ones that you may or may not have used before if you had a Nikon camera. A lot of them kind of just go under the radar. Some of them are newer, some of them have been around for a long time. No matter what, I think they're great to know about, and they work in a kind of particular way, so we're going to go through a few of them here. Starting with active D lighting. Now, this is one that I think a lot of people get confused by or they don't fully understand, and I get why. It is kind of complicated. There are some great deep dives into this, and I'll link some videos below that I think are helpful, but here's what I think you need to know about active D lighting. Firstly, it's available in both photo and video mode. So if you're shooting photos, it will affect your JPEGs and your RAWs, and we'll talk about that. But it will also affect your video if you're using a baked-in look like a natural profile or rich tone portrait or standard, any of those profiles, it will affect that as well. Ostensibly what this does is it brings down the highlights and it brings up the shadows. I think that's where it's actually most effective, is in softening the roll-off on the highlights. And in terms of the shadows, it will bring them up, but it will introduce a little bit of noise when it does that, depending on what your other settings are. You can go from normal to extra high, and then in photo mode, you can also set it to just auto, and it will determine what it thinks is best. Now, as I said, this affects both your RAW and your JPEG output, but not in the way that you necessarily think. For JPEG, it's pretty straightforward. What you see on the playback screen is what you get. That is what it's going to end up being. It's basically using computation when it is rendering that RAW into the JPEG in camera, and it is baking in those settings. Now, in order for it to actually affect your RAW image, you need to make sure that in Adobe or in Capture One, whichever one you're using, you have it set up so that when it imports a photo, it pulls in the camera settings. For me, most of the time, I have it set up so that when I import a photo, it is automatically applying one of my presets. The reason I do that is because that is kind of what I want my photos to end up looking like. And so right away, I want to see them with that preset on them so I have a sense of what I'm looking at and getting it closer to that final image. In doing so, that basically negates all of the settings that it is naturally doing to the raw photo in order to make it look like it has had some adjustments made to it. Now, when you're importing the photo, you're going to notice that the more active D lighting you use, the darker the image looks for you. Basically what it's doing is it is adjusting your highlights and your shadows. It's basically bringing down the highlights and up the shadows, but it's also affecting the exposure. And so it's not baking anything into the raw file. So the raw file is still as it is, but when you import it, it is going to look like it's being affected. You can still, reset all of those and get back to the base image as if you weren't using active D lighting at all. But that's just something to note. I find that this setting is obviously very helpful for JPEGs. When you want to create your own kind of recipes using the picture controls, this is a nice setting to use because it kind of mimics the same thing that you would do with Fujifilm using the DR 200, 400 settings. It's essentially like that. But in video, it's nice too because sometimes when you're shooting, you just want to really make sure that you're not clipping your highlights, which is such a pain to try and bring back in post. And this is a really nice way to do it. In fact, my buddy Liam, who shoots an enormous amount of weddings, he shoots everything in the neutral profile and he adds active D lighting set to normal. And that allows him to make sure that he is just kind of hedging his bets on his highlights a little bit more. And it works really well for his workflow. Quick pause here for 2 things. Number 1, thank you. I appreciate you watching. And if you haven't subscribed yet, which I know a lot of you haven't, hit it for me. That would be really helpful. I'm trying to get to a pretty high number before the end of the year as a little kind of push for myself to make a lot of content over this next little while, but I also have a baby coming, so I don't have too much time. So I need to feel like people are invested and they care, so hit that button if you can. Secondly, I have a whole bunch of presets that are on sale right now on my website. If you're interested, they're super cheap. I think it comes out to like $7.50 Canadian, which is like, I think like 48 cents for Americans or Europeans. So yeah, I would say it's a good deal. I think you'll like them, and let's get back to the video. Thanks, peace. Next up is portrait impression balance. This is an interesting setting, and again, it affects your JPEG and it will affect your RAW if you have it set up so that the camera settings are what is imported into Lightroom or Capture One. What this does is it prioritizes the skin tones, meaning basically red, yellow, and orange, and it affects those. What you can do is you can set it to being either brighter or darker, or you can set it to have more magenta or more yellow, and it will only affect the skin tones. Keep in mind, anything that falls within the skin tones is also going to be affected. So if you have a lot of red, orange, or yellow in your scene, those will be affected too. So in a scenario like I'm shooting right now, something like that lamp is going to be affected a lot, but something like my black shirt shouldn't really be affected all that much. It's a convenient way to really dial in things when you need to. The reason you would use this would be, let's say you have a situation where you have a lot of mixed lighting or it's kind of tough and the skin tones are just not looking great, but everything else is looking good. You've tried dialing it in using your white balance, but it's affecting everything else too much and you really want to isolate your skin tones. This is where this could be really effective for you. Again, all it's doing is affecting that red, yellow, and orange on your sliders in Lightroom. So when you actually import the photo, what you'll see is that if you're adjusting the brightness and you go down to your color panel, it will be adjusting the luminance of those things, either up or down. Or if you're adjusting the color, it will affect the color of those things, either more on the yellow side or more on the magenta side, shifting them either way relative to what you have it set to. Next is easy exposure compensation. Now, whether or not this is going to be effective for you is going to be relative to the camera you're using. What it allows you to do is to map your exposure compensation to one of your dials. So either your front or your back dial, you can map so that it can just quickly adjust your exposure compensation. Now, when would you use this? Let's say, for example, you're shooting in aperture priority mode. You have your aperture set to your front dial and your back dial ostensibly wouldn't really be doing anything because your shutter speed is going to be controlled automatically and your ISO is going to be controlled automatically. So you're in auto ISO, your shutter speed's being changed for you and you're only affecting your aperture. But what about if you want to change your exposure compensation? Normally what you would do is you would hit the exposure compensation button, you'd hold that down, and then you would roll the dial. All this does is take away that step of having to hold down the exposure compensation. It just means that you can just move that dial really quickly and you can go in third of a stop increments up or down so that you can basically adjust whatever you want to adjust in your exposure using exposure compensation rather than using ISO. Now there's a few caveats to this. It's really important that you set your minimum shutter value to something that makes sense for you. For me, I have it set to 1/250th. What that means is that no matter what, it is going to prioritize adjusting the ISO before the shutter speed unless it needs to go brighter than 1/250th will allow it. So let's say my max ISO is 64,000 and it's still not bright enough, it will then drop down my shutter speed. But so long as there's enough room in the ISO to move around, it will not touch my shutter speed. So make sure you set that to whatever makes sense for what you're shooting. For me, my standard is 1/250th. Maybe for what you're shooting, 1/125th makes sense, or 1/80th if it's not really moving. Maybe you need to go higher to 1/500th or 1/1000th if that is what you're shooting, like sports or something like that. You also want to make sure you're in auto ISO so that it has the ability to actually change the ISO for you. Now, let's say you're not in auto ISO. The only thing it's going to be able to change is the shutter. That allows you to be in aperture priority mode or shutter speed priority mode, basically in the same settings. All you have to do is turn on and off your auto ISO. So that's actually kind of a cool, convenient thing. When would you use this though? Ultimately, I think you would use this when you're in like an aperture priority mode and you don't want to have to fuss around with your ISO. You want to just adjust your exposure based on the exposure compensation dial and you don't want to worry about anything else. You basically want to let the camera make the decision for you. It's a handy setting if you're in aperture priority mode and you really just want to focus on that, but you want the flexibility of being able to really, really quickly change your exposure. Now, I hear you, you could just press the exposure compensation button and then move it around. But what if you've mapped that button to do something else? This allows you to free up that dial that would otherwise not really be used in aperture priority mode. For the next one, we're going to go to our custom settings and go to the video settings menu, Fine ISO control. This is a cool one because what it allows you to do is to more finely tune your ISO. Instead of going from what would normally be your smallest increment, 1/3 of a stop, which is what you get standard in pretty much every version of every camera, it allows you to actually go to 1/6 of a stop. So you can fine tune your ISO even more. I think this is a really helpful tool, maybe not as much if you're shooting in a RAW workflow or even in a log workflow where you probably are gonna stick between your kind of two base ISOs. But if you're shooting in any of the other picture profiles, this is really helpful. Why I like it is because it gives me more control, but it also allows me to make small adjustments to my ISO as needed while I'm recording. So instead of having to do larger jumps of 1/3 of a stop, I can do smaller jumps of 1/6, and it's probably going to be less noticeable in the final image. Why would you want to do this? Well, let's say you're filming something you can't redo. Let's say it's like a wedding ceremony or an interview or something where like you don't really feel like it's appropriate for you to try and get them to redo something. But you know your exposure is off a little bit, and you know maybe let's say you need to go a half stop or even a full stop brighter. It allows you to do that slowly so that it's less noticeable. It's almost like being able to adjust your aperture or adjust an ND really, really slowly and effectively. And an added bonus, if you have a lens with a control ring, you can actually map your ISO to that. And then by putting it into 1/6 of increments, you can really slowly move it over, maybe 3 or 4 seconds so that that change almost looks like it was just a natural shift in light. And that's really effective. The last one we're going to talk about today is actually the next setting in that video menu. It's extended shutter speeds. You've probably seen people online or in different videos and stuff doing a really cool kind of like shutter drag effect with their videos where it almost looks like they're stitching together a bunch of slow kind of blurry photos and they're getting that kind of cool effect. And then you've gone to do it yourself and then you go to change your shutter speed. You're like, okay, great. I just have to slow my shutter speed down. You bring it down all the way and you get stuck at 1/1, basically meaning that a 1-to-1 ratio with your shutter that you're using. So if you're using 24 frames per second, you can't go lower than 24 frames. That's not going to be slow enough to get you that shutter drag feel, and you're going to be frustrated. At least I was until I knew about this setting. Once you turn this on, it will allow you to go down way, way lower. So you can all of a sudden go to like 1/10, 1/8, 1/6, whatever you need to get the kind of vision that you're looking for executed. That's what you can do. It's a handy setting, it's quick and easy, and I would just say make sure that you are aware that this is what you're doing because it's really easy to then accidentally bump below that and then you can get some funky looking footage. But as long as you're paying attention to your settings, it's an awesome one. There's a whole bunch of other cool random little settings in the Nikon system that we could go over. And if you're interested in that, let me know and I'll make another video like this. Let me know in the comments below which setting you're actually most either confused by or you think is really cool that we should cover that you think other people should know about. And yeah, we'll talk to you in the next one. Thanks. Peace.